Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to Going Deeper, where we go a little bit deeper with this past month's teaching series. I'm here, Martin, joined by Helen and Daz. Hi, guys.
Hello.
How are you doing on this wet, miserable, dark, late November evening?
Yeah, okay. When you said about going deeper, I really wanted to just do something like that.
We should get that old Delirious song. You're probably too young to remember it. I want to go deeper.
No, I want to burn, but I don't know how to swim. Yeah, it's great.
That's just looking like he doesn't know
I don't know that one.
No. Oh well.
I think I became a Christian just after Delirious. Like they were. I don't
know. That was definitely their best song. Definitely the best song.
Whoa.
Oh, Helen's disagreeing.
No, I'm a History Maker fan.
I know that one.
I want to be
just that I'm saying.
History Maker. It was solid. We've become so just churchy. So apologies if any of you are watching and you're like, this is a culture that is completely unknown to me. I apologize, but we're just reminiscing. See, Daz is one of those like, no, I haven't got
no, I know those.
Yeah. Anyway, that's not. We're not here to talk about Delirious. We're here to go, like I said, to go a bit deeper with our months of November's sermon series, which was Church Rebranded. Just for the sake of legal reasons, we have actually based this on a book produced by a guy called Jeff Jones, and it's called Rebranding Christianity. I think that's right. I would put it up, but I haven't got it anywhere. I've got it on Kindle, so I haven't got a physical copy to show you. But if I remember, I'll stick their website on our description of this video. That's been really, really useful. It's a really, really good book. There's podcasts out there. There's sermons. So we have used that as inspiration for this particular series. And Helen, you did a great job because you closed our series this morning with a sermon on what was the name of your sermon?
It was Create a Better Reputation.
Creating a Better Reputation. And you did a really good job right at the beginning of just summing up the series by using all the titles of the sermon series. So are you able to do that now? Because Daz did one, I did 2 and 3, and Helen, you did 4.
Yeah, so all I said was we have a problem. So we need to get back to basics because we are brand ambassadors for Jesus. So we need to create a better reputation.
There you go. So thank you. Well done. Very good. So that basically took all the titles of our 4 sermons and combined it into a nice little sentence there. And really, I guess the premise of this series, based on the premise of Jeff Jones's book, is that if the church was a brand and it was a company, it would be deemed as being in free fall. It's in really, really bad state of affairs. And Helen, like this morning, you picked up on a few brands that maybe have experienced that. Nestle was the one that I'd thought of, where they got in a whole lot of trouble with breastfeeding women in the third world and stuff like that. And people refused, and probably still do refuse, to buy Nestle. And you could argue that actually the church is in a far worse state. Where we used to, probably when Delirious was around, which we've already spoken about, Christians were seen as weird but okay. They were a bit too moralistic. Now you could argue that in some groups we're seen as immoral, if not immoral. So our reputation has shifted in a downward spiral, unfortunately. And we were just trying to be realistic about that, but also think of some ways in which we as individuals can help turn that around. And Helen, you were talking about how we as a church can maybe be church in a way that's going to improve our reputation. Just before we delve into our question this evening, which is around about grace or truth, Daz, was there anything that stood out to you in the series that made you think?
Yeah, loads. I think I found it really helpful. It's felt quite an honest series. Like it's quite refreshing, and people, like, after I did the first one, people came and said, like, wow, that was I don't think it was like my sermon was like particularly amazing. I think the message of let's just admit for a second that we're not doing a great job. We could do a lot better. And actually, what we need to do is go back to the basics and just start again with where Jesus kind of set us off. It was really helpful for people. That's the vibe I kind of got from people that spoke. And I think that's how I feel as well. I was thinking like, oh yeah, like we make it a bit hard, I think, sometimes for ourselves, or we're sort of our own worst enemies when we get hung up on the religious-y stuff, and we forget that there is a balance of grace and truth. And I think that, the thing that stood out to me is like, oh yeah, it should be easier maybe than I make it in my head sometimes. Definitely.
And Helen, what about you?
Yeah, I think at the beginning I was excited for church rebranded. What's new? What are we going to do? So I was like, oh no, actually we're rebranding by going backwards, sort of thing, and going back to that original. And I was like, well, that's even better. And I think I think again, I wasn't the only one who was like, oh, something new. But actually, about going back to what Jesus actually called us to do, going back to what the Bible actually says, to going back to, to the commandment being love. And actually, we start there, and everything else is on top of that. I think it was just really nice to be reminded of. I think sometimes we can get lost in everything else, that we forget actually what we're called to do. As church.
I think it made me aware of how proud I am of Hawley Baptist Church. Hawley actually has a real reputation for being loving and kind and accepting, and we have a full breadth and range. And we talk about grace and truth this evening, and that's a real balance, but that we have to try and maintain. But what we've managed to do at Hawley Baptist Church is preach what we believe is the truth, and yet we've got a very broad church. We have lots of people that believe lots of different things, and in different stages of their walk in faith, and yet they're all welcome and part of the church. So I think some of you guys might be watching and you belong to a different church. You're so welcome. We're so pleased to have you. Some of you may not go to a church, or maybe you got some bad past experiences of churches. But I'd encourage you that to come along to Hawley Baptist Church and at least meet these amazing people, because they are great. And so in some ways, I did feel like we were preaching a little bit to the choir, or to the converted, that actually unfortunately, compared to the vast majority of churches, we are growing, we are doing well, we're reaching out, we're seeing people come to faith, and we're loving and welcoming. But there is always room for improvement, and there are still, particularly around this question we're looking at this evening, there are still some issues, some unanswered questions, some debates around what I'd put grace or truth. Grace or truth. And it comes from this passage in John chapter 1, verse 14. It says the word, that's how the phrase they used to describe Jesus. The word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's what we're going to be remembering in a month's time. What's the date today? 26. So just under a month's time, Christmas Day, we'll remember when Jesus became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father. And it has this phrase, Jesus was full of grace and truth. And it's just an interesting phrase, because if I look at them and try and define what those are, as grace, I kind of define as loving and kind and gracious and considerate. Whereas I'd say truth is black and white, definitive, hard line, strict. And it's almost like you've got grey and fuzzy on one hand and black and white on the other. So how do we do the two? And this passage in John says Jesus exemplifies how you are both at the same time. 100% grace and 100% truth. I'm like, well, how do we do that? What does that look like? So over to you guys, because obviously you have all the answers. It's a nice, easy question to answer. Any particular thoughts? Anything that jumps to mind? Any particular scenarios you can think? Because I think possibly Christians fall into at their extremes that grace ends, where they want to be as loving and kind and accepting as possible, maybe possibly at the expense of truth. And then at the other end, people want to be truthful and they want to say this is what the rules are, and this is, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. And they do that at the expense of grace and love and kindness. What do you reckon? Helen, over to you first.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Nice.
Oh, no.
Go on, Helen.
Well, first of all, where would you see yourself on the spectrum from grace and love to truth and rules?
Oh, no, that one's easier. I'm definitely too woolly and down the grace end. But I'd rather be at that end than at the truth end.
I'm sure everyone at the either end said they'd rather be at the end they're at rather than the other end. That's why they're at that end.
But I'm very aware I probably need to shift slightly more to the truth end. Right. It also depends what sort of mood I'm in that day. If I've had a bad day, I'm probably more likely to be a bit more blunt with someone. But I think what's encouraging but also difficult is that truth doesn't always mean being blunt and being rude. I was having this conversation with a student this week about actually you can say what you think and you can say what you believe and you can say what you, in their situation, what you need, without being rude about it. And, you know, even though what I would say is truth, I believe is truth, I know there's a lots of people who think, well, truth is relative, truth is your thing. And so sometimes I can use that as a little bit of a cop-out and say, well, actually, I believe that this is the truth. So then rather than going, this is the truth, because actually they'll be like, well, that's your truth. And I'll be like, okay, so I might as well frame it that way in the beginning so they don't get up on their back legs. Because the second they go on the back foot, like, well, that's your truth. Actually, if I present it as my truth, they'd be more likely to whatever, even though I believe it's the truth rather than my truth. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think probably going back to maybe about 20 years ago, there was this idea that, you know, there is no absolute truth. It was quite popular, really. Been around for years, obviously, but it's popular in the sort of the noughties. You know, you believe what you want to believe. I'll believe what I want to believe. As long as we don't hurt anyone, we're fine. Yeah, like you said, a bit wishy-washy, but it's everything's nice. I possibly wish. Do you think we're shifted from that now, where actually maybe people are a little bit more hardline, possibly with what they think the truth is? And I don't just mean Christians; I mean non-Christians as well.
Yeah, I think that, like, I don't know if it's. I think maybe if certain groups' voices get louder. Like, I don't know if everybody was always like, oh yeah, like this post-truth thing is definitely for me. Like, not everybody thought that, but I think if that became the popular opinion, and maybe now, I mean, I think now, like, people it just tends to be 50-50, and it depends which, you know, algorithm is feeding you, you know, this whichever mainstream media it's what it wants to. But I think that what Jesus did is he had grace and truth. And the question, you know, grace or truth is a tricky one, because I probably am like Helen. I would like to be more gracious than I would. I don't know. I don't know. I think like Helen said, that the approach is so important. Our approach to people, you know, which is who I guess we're called to tell Jesus about, is going to be the most important thing. And you almost can't have, like, grace or truth separate from one another are both equally useless. Like, I could be the most gracious, loving person, but if I'm never therefore saying what I think, or, you know, or telling people what I really believe about them, like, how useful is that to them? It's not useful at all. Whereas if somebody told me all the time exactly what they thought of me and how I did, and they were never gracious, I would. You know, I would stop listening to what they say after a point in time, because it'd be like, this just hurts me. Ouch. So I think that we have to find a balance. I think that's what Jesus did. He was full of grace and he was full of truth, like both at the same time. Whenever he met people, he was fully gracious, but he was also fully truthful. And that was different for, I guess, probably every person he met, which is sort of half helpful. And I think that's where we can become a bit unstuck as Christians is that I think people know, like, very clearly what they perceive us to be against, you know, as a group of individuals. They don't necessarily know what we're for, and I think that's the balance we need to strike. It's like, actually, we do love people. Like, it's a big part of what we do. And we need to show them that by being loving to each other at least, but also, being like, we could up the grace a bit. I think at this point,
I think if anyone says to you, "I want to tell you this in love," then you know you got to brace yourself for a.
This is gonna hurt.
It's gonna hurt. They're not really being loving at all. They just seem to think, if I prefix it with that phrase, I can say whatever I want. And
no offense, but
yes. Don't take this the wrong way, but come on. And I wonder whether. So I'm going to be controversial and chuck out a couple of scenarios, which I think possibly are down the end of the truth rather than grace. But some people are going to be like, "Oh, I can't believe you said that." So I would say rejecting someone because of their sexuality. I've heard some people say that if you are the wrong sexual orientation and practicing, then you're going to hell. So that's where they're getting. I'm not sure if that's even the truth, actually. I don't think it is. But anyway, that people who pray outside abortion clinics. Ooh, that's a very tricky one. Very tricky one. Can you think of any other scenarios down that end? Then we'll have a look. Think of some scenarios down the other end.
People that are scenario being like, wow, not gracious enough. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah, not gracious.
Yeah.
So technically, they might be true, although that might be debatable. But they're just being completely lacking in any grace or kindness.
Maybe if we didn't, I don't know. If we turn people away at the church doors because, I don't know, they're drunk or something, maybe that would be not very gracious. I don't know.
But I know one church that refused to allow a sort of an Alcoholics Anonymous group to use their church. They didn't want that kind of people.
That kind of people.
Oh my goodness, that's like the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I think that's completely off the spectrum, that one. Dear me.
There's no excuse for that one. There's no justification for that.
No, not at all. How about Helen? How about on the other end? You said you're more down the what you call the fuzzy end. Any scenarios there where they're full of grace and love and kindness, which I have to admit I'd rather be that than the opposites, but maybe have rejected truth or just pushed it under the carpet?
It kind of depends on where you stand on a lot of things. So some people would say allowing me to preach, because there are people who are very anti women preaching, women in leadership, those sorts of things, and actually by letting me do that, or inviting me to do that, should I say, actually we're just not going to face that. We're just not going to talk about the whole women in leadership thing. We're just going to brush over that, because so I think that can often be a bone of contention within churches globally.
I think sometimes, at that end of the spectrum, people often do things out of kindness, and therefore they'd rather not look at the truth or just ignore it, because actually they're always doing it with the best of motives. I think they probably are at both ends, but at the end it's more like, actually, I'm just not going to look at the truth, because I just don't. I want to be as loving, as accepting, as kind as I can, and that's just going to make life too complicated. So I'd rather just do what I want to do, rather than study the Bible and think what it is. Yeah,
I reckon at that end there's probably less of the big things, like the praying outside of an abortion clinic. Yeah, but it's more of the not calling out our friends when they do something that doesn't quite line up. It's that lack of accountability. Maybe it's that those sorts of things, because you're like, oh, actually, this friendship's going really well. they're getting introduced to church, or maybe it's someone who's already in church, and they're going, but actually if I call them out, then that may ruin that and may drive them away from church, and so therefore they don't have faith at all, and that don't have that relationship with God at all. So therefore I'm not going to call them out on whatever. I'm not going to say, oh, do you think this, or oh, do you think that, or not present what I would say is the truth to them. But actually letting them just do their thing, because God will deal with it. It's not my place, that's God's place to deal with.
And I find that very, very tempting, partly because I don't like confrontation. It's nothing to do with kindness, I just don't like
it's easy not to.
So therefore we'd rather just let them get on with it and not mention it. I could mention all sorts of things from up the front. It's the one-to-one stuff that I struggle with a bit more, whereas some people don't. My Jen has put a few things. He said, sometimes I think people take pride in being truth tellers, but can be done without love and grace. Some people say, I speak my mind, I speak the truth. I think, no, you're just rude. Rude and horrible.
Share your opinion freely, isn't it?
But actually they do that without really any consideration of the person they're sharing it for. And I think Jen's right. Sometimes it can be a pride thing. Actually, it's more about them fulfilling their needs to speak the truth, rather than doing any consideration of the person's need to hear something kind and loving and helpful.
I guess the other side of that coin is that, like, the opposite is not considering, if we don't tell people, like, someone's going to make a bad decision, like, and we just know they are, we think like, this is going to ruin your life, or it's going to make your life very hard. But we're too gracious, and we think like, well, I need to be kind to you, I need to let you figure that out. So whatever we convince ourselves is the reason, like, not to speak the truth to them in that situation, is the other side of that coin, isn't it? Because we're not being considerate of them and their life and have the input we could have in them. So it could be the same, but the other way around. I guess.
Argue then that telling the truth is one of the most loving things we can do.
I think it can be, definitely.
But it can be done in an unkind way.
Yes.
When I was younger, I was I made a string of bad decisions, as people do when they're younger, and it later transpired that all of my friends had been talking about it behind my back, and not one of them had talked to me about it. And I was like, and then one of them eventually came and chatted to me and was like, Helen, we're concerned. Like, are you all right? Sort of thing. Like, we've had this lovely conversation. Like, and it was really lovely. It was really like, they sort of, pointed out a couple of things in my life. I sort of went, yeah, you're probably right. And actually it was a real turning point for me, going, right, let's get this sorted. Sort of thing. But what hurt was that everyone else had been talking about it, and that no one had spoken to me about it. And actually this person speaking truth to me was the most loving thing they could have done. And actually they did it with so much grace and so much love, and they picked their time, obviously they picked their words, and actually and I was receptive to hearing it, probably because I already knew it. But at the same time, there wasn't that sort of Helen, that wasn't there. Because actually the truth was told with grace, and she came with grace to tell me truth. She didn't come with truth and do it gracefully. She led with grace, which was very, very noticed and noted.
I had a similar situation when I was younger, and but it took a lot of courage for the person to speak up. Actually, they didn't speak up. They told someone else and they spoke up. But actually, because I got really defensive and I got really angry, and they were perfectly in the right, and that I definitely needed sorting. And for me, like you, it was a turning point. Something needed to be done. But my initial response was anger and outrage and defense. And so sometimes telling the truth is a really, really difficult thing to do. It might be the most loving, but which is why it's a lot easier just to I'll be loving and kind and
not talk to them about it.
Not talk about anything.
That's definitely something we do a lot.
I'll be ready for when they're ready to talk about it.
Yes,
I'll be here waiting to pick up the pieces.
I'll let them bring it up. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? I'll let them bring it up.
Yeah. So we'll spend some time talking about the extremes and maybe possibly some of the reasons behind it. So how do we walk that middle road and try and get a balance of grace and truth? I thought it might be a good idea to ask that question. What would Jesus do? And I'm just going to read to you a passage from Matthew, which is one of the Gospels. It's Matthew chapter 9 and verses 9 to 13. This is Jesus going around looking for guys to be his disciples. They were his followers who are going to live with him and learn from him. And for a Jewish young man, it's one of the most privileged things you can do. And particularly seeing Jesus as a rising star and attracting a lot of attention, to be asked by Jesus to be one of his disciples was just absolutely amazing. This is what Matthew writes. He says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, so Matthew was a tax collector, which was like the worst job you could possibly do, because not only were you taking money from the Jewish people to give to the occupying Roman force, they usually took a significant cut themselves. So they were wealthy, unpopular guys that stole from everyone. Follow me, Jesus told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. So that's pretty unusual. And then so Jesus basically asked Matthew to be his disciples, but it gets worse. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, and that was a significant thing. It wasn't just eating dinner, it was basically you were associating with that person. You were saying, this is one of my guys, this is who I want to, I'm this is my family, this is my friends. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. So it got even worse. All these really bad people turned up to this meal. And you can imagine possibly what it might have been like. It wouldn't have been a church picnic. I think it might have been a little bit more rowdy and raucous than that. Yeah. And when the Pharisees saw this, now Pharisees would definitely be down the truth end of the spectrum. They're all about rules and regulations and getting everything right. When they saw this, they asked the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Because up until this point, they were quite interested in Jesus. He had some good stuff to say. On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call righteous, but sinners. I think that's something key with Jesus. He was merciful, and he seemed to have a lot of truth to say to the religious people, and a lot of grace and mercy to show to the sinners, for sake of a better term, those on the fringes of society, those who were deemed as being dirty and best kept at arm's length, I guess. Yeah.
And I think that sort of links into what Paul says in Corinthians around actually who are we to judge those outside of the church?
Yeah.
Like they haven't signed up to this life. They haven't signed up to live to our morals, to our, what we think is right and wrong. And so actually I wonder if it's, looking at, it seems to be sort of not always, but Jesus was very truthful to those not following him as well. But actually he did it. It was very sort of grace towards those that weren't yet signed up as such, and truth to those who were. It's not that easily black and white, but it was like on that spectrum we talked about earlier. He was always sort of beautifully in the middle, sort of thing, but slightly more gracious to those outside and slightly more truthfully to those supposedly inside, or those who thought they were inside, shall we say? Yeah. Because whether you think the Pharisees were inside or not is a whole another thing. But, to those who thought they were part of the fold, actually, he was very sort of, no, like, this is how it should be, but always still in a gracious way. But, normally in a gracious way, probably turning over tables. There wasn't a lot of grace there, I guess.
Brood of vipers. He was quite mean to some of them. You hypocrite.
Yeah.
And, the woman at the well, there was a lot of truth there, sort of thing. You're right. The bloke you're living with at the moment isn't your husband, but and he was very sort of blunt, but actually did it all in love. But eating with those who were on the fringes, actually not even on the fringes, who were outcasts, that's where it's really grace heavy. in those moments. But then the Pharisees, very truth heavy. Not that it's that black and white and clear cut.
Yeah. I think it's a shame that we read Jesus's words, but we don't read necessarily how he said it or what he looked like or what is, was he putting a hand in their shoulder? How was he actually saying these things? Because that, body language is the majority of language, more so than words. It's our tone and how we say these things, and we don't get that necessarily from Jesus, and that's why we can very easily twist his words. Yeah,
which is also why the sign language Bible, just to be the little geek in the corner, the sign language is a really interesting thing to create, because you can't just deliver words. You have to deliver them in a style or like with emotion, or you can't deliver them like in the same way written text can. Yeah. And so they're having to go back through lots of, the original texts and these sorts of things to try and get any inference of how things were said. And so it's probably going to be it is one of the best versions or translations of the Bible when it comes to that sort of idea, because they're having to really look back at actually how was this said, and why was it said that way.
Sounds good. That's so cool.
Yeah. It's not finished yet though, so I can't tell you.
Oh well.
They're still working on it.
Any thoughts, Daz?
So many thoughts. I think I can't remember what the original question was. How can we balance grace and truth?
And Jesus' example.
Jesus, he was so. I love that. In fact, I'm glad you read that bit from Matthew. It's one of my favorite. And that's what he said to the Pharisees. I always come back to in my own head when we get stuck. I mean, I'm always getting bogged down in conversation. People hear about what my job is. They want to say, what do you think about all the big stuff? They want to know. And I always come back to Jesus saying to the Pharisees, go away and learn the meaning of this phrase. God requires mercy, not sacrifice. He's more interested in how we align our heart than he is about what we know and how we think people should behave. And I think that's what Jesus was always looking for in people is their faith and their heart attitude towards others. And he always led with like his heart for people, and then told them the truth. He's entertained conversation with that Samaritan woman before, like just laying out all the stuff, but then he finishes by saying, just being really kind to her when nobody, like, he shouldn't have even spoke to her. That was the sort of cultural norm. He always just cared about people first, and then would give them the truth.
He was willing to. He broke social norms. He stepped out of what's acceptable. He was quite blunt. He spoke the truth, and yet he did it in a way that was attractive. So, and it's like going back to this whole thing about tone and whatever. Helen, you mentioned the Samaritan woman. He told her, he drew out the fact that she was possibly a prostitute. We don't know, but certainly had numerous partners in her life. He drew that out. He said that, and yet she ran off. She was just
praises.
Inspired in awe of him, brought the other villagers to come and meet him. She's like, this is amazing. This guy told me everything I ever did. So he does it in a way that is unbelievably attractive. And I'm like, how do we speak the truth and be attractive with it? Because I think that's the thing. And like you said, Daz, it's showing mercy and kindness and love.
And realizing what the truth, like the truth that we have is that God like made us and loved us. And that he's given us, he's the person that made us, and he's given us we always the people I speak to tend to understand the religious side of Christianity as like the rules and regulations by which you have to live to achieve heaven. And I was thinking that's a shame, because it's actually, God gave the Israelites the 10 commandments. He sort of brought them out of slavery into like the land of promise. And he said, and if you want to have a great life, like here's 10 sort of suggestions I have to make sure your life like stays great and don't.
They're a bit more than suggestions, I think.
Well, that's don't rob each other, like look after me, like I'm
the 10 suggestions.
Yeah, not suggestions, but like they're not like, I don't know. He's not a fun spoiler. Like I think we all sometimes think like God's like wants to spoil our fun or like keep us in the sort of boring lane or the slow lane, when actually he just wants us to have like a really nice, meaningful, fulfilled, and happy life. And if
Yeah.
we can do things his way, like, it will be that. And if we can remember that in our own heads, then when people like come with this attitude of like, oh, but God's a funds for, we can think like, no, that's not true. Like, let me tell you what is true. I love, you know, not stealing from people. Like, that seems to work for me like really nicely. And, you know, people, I have lots of
so
friends
much
because
nice stuff. If you stole it, think of
You
the
could.
money you would save.
but you'd have no friends, and you'd have no, like, you'd have loads of money, but there'd be no one to share it with, and
you'd have
your
people
family would
prison.
hate you, and like, it would, you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
that's the balance we need to strike in, is remembering that we have the truth, and it's like a really good truth. Like, it works. It is the way life is supposed to be lived.
Yeah.
And we just kind of need to frame it like that, maybe in the way we talk about it. I
Yeah.
think that's how I think I probably want to start being better at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Jenny
and
says
it's like,
this.
go on.
Says we should not
Yeah.
judge. We're called to help people on their journey to hear about Jesus' love for them. And I was listening to a sermon recently. It talked about the fact that we're here to have a wide welcome, but actually we're called to walk a narrow path, and we're called to bring people on that narrow path, which is a path which is black and white. It's narrow, it's truth, but actually we need to have a big wide funnel and welcome as many people to take that path. Now, not everyone will take that. That's down to them. That's not down to us. It's down to what God's doing in their heart. But we're called to welcome them and draw them to that path. And that's why at Holy Baptist Church, our vision statement is Holy Baptist Church is a vibrant community where everyone is welcome, lives are changing, and Jesus is King. You know, everyone's welcome, but you know, God loves us the way we are, but He loves us too much to keep us that way. You know, we want people to change. We are here to bring about change in people, and we have to tell them the truth. But we also have that change ultimately comes around because Jesus is King, and His Holy Spirit is there to change people's hearts. And I think sometimes, like Helen or Daz, you said that we can hold back and just think, oh, God will sort them out, and then when they're ready, then we can pick up the pieces or whatever. And yes, there is some truth in that, because we can't change someone's heart. We can't even change someone's mind. God can do that through the work of His Holy Spirit, and we're all on a journey. And it's a lot more about the direction we're facing, whether we're facing towards God or away from God, rather than how far we are on that journey. Because relatively, we're all in the same place, really. But actually, we are also called to help them, and you help them by telling the truth and being attractive and drawing them and encouraging them to walk that path and help them walk on that path.
Yeah, and like, you know, there's only so much we are responsible for, isn't there, as well? Like Jesus, when He sent out 70, was He sent out 72, and He said to them, go into the towns and tell them like about me. But if they like reject that truth, then you could just shake the dust off your feet and go to the next town. Like, there's only so much you can do. You know, all we can do is tell people about our experience of Jesus and how He's changed like my life. That's all I try and do. And if they reject that, like, that's really, I'm sad for them, and I wish everybody found and loved Jesus like I do. But if they don't, like, that's not much you can do. Be on pray for them and pray God keeps working on them, like, obviously.
So, Helen, have we solved the problem of how we can be 100% gracious and 100% true?
I think, yeah, we solved it.
We nailed it.
Yeah, no, we haven't.
No, but I think, you know, we just need to remember, you know, as we keep saying, you know, Jesus did it all with grace, but always in truth. And actually, it comes down to those two sort of Bible verses that I'm amazed none of us have repeated yet. Of, you know, actually, Jesus came so we'd have life and have it to its full. So, you know, where Daz was saying around, you know, actually people think that Jesus is a, you know, fun spoiler.
Yeah.
Then actually, no, He came so we can have life to its fullness.
And He was partying with tax collectors and sinners. I mean, He was not. And
they threw the best parties. Yeah. I bet they threw the best parties.
They had money and they were very naughty. So I think they were possibly the best parties.
Yeah. But also holding that with, you know, then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And actually, we can't do this without the truth, because inevitably, you know, in the end of it all, that's what does the magic. You know, it's the truth that when we understand that, we go, oh, okay, I've got this. But it's doing that all with grace, because actually, you know, as the guy whose name I've already forgotten said, actually the grace plus truth plus time equals transformation. And actually we're called to, you know, and very much in that order, where it says, you know, in the Bible verse it started with, you know, that he was full of grace and full of truth. Actually they're in that order for a reason. But it's not a magical ta-da. It's, you know, something that takes time, takes relationship, takes community. I think if I went up to someone on the street and called them out on something, chances are it's not going to go too well.
No.
But when done in community and when done in love and done with grace, I think actually there's a real place for it, of course.
I love that story of Jesus's encounter with another tax collector, Zacchaeus, who he said, "Oi, come down. I'm coming to your house for dinner." And he goes to the house, and Zacchaeus is transformed by that encounter. And he goes and gives away all his money and gives away even more. And he's transformed by that encounter with Jesus. You know, we might be the only Jesus someone meets, and we have that same spirit living within us if we're a follower of Jesus. So, like, how can we be so welcoming and loving and kind and attractive, and yet speak the truth so that people's lives are changed? Because that's what it's all about. That's why we exist as Holy Baptist Church. That's what we should be about as followers of Jesus. It's about changing people's lives for the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
Wow. Daz, have you got anything to say in closing?
I don't think so. I feel like we kind of we didn't nail it, obviously.
Nailed it.
I think I think the best thing you said was, what would Jesus do? I think that is a thing, but, you know, people wear it on their wrist, and I think Jesus is just the best example. And if we want to find the balance, I think if we just always turn back to reading about Jesus' encounters with people and remind ourselves what his heart was always tilted towards them, and like just opening up their relationship with God as much as he could. I think if we can do that, we won't go far wrong. Well, we don't get it right every time because we're not Jesus, but I like to think we're working our way towards being more like him.
Yeah. Just to say that we've got Christmas coming up. We've got numerous. So go to our website and you'll find out what we've got planned in terms of our services. But in the new year, we are doing a new sermon series called 90 Days, where from the 1st of January through to Palm Sunday, we're going to be looking at Jesus, because I think it's so important, particularly off the back of this series, that we just go back to Jesus and see what he did and how he did it. So we're going to do a 12-week sermon series, and then week 13 will be Easter Sunday, looking at the life and ministry of Jesus. So I'm really excited about that. So that's 90 days. And also we're going to be hopefully offering resources that are going to encourage people to, during those 90 days, to read the Bible, to learn more, and to really get into Jesus over that 3-month period. So I'm excited about that. But thank you, Helen. Thank you, Daz. Thank you to everyone that has watched. Thank you to my wife, who's done loads of comments.
So
many for us to put them all up, but thank you very much. And do subscribe to our channel, and do share this on social media and with your friends. And I hope you enjoyed it. So take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.